Okay, as we reflect on the commonalities and variations of Africa and the Americas, let's think about what's important and finding that balance in world history. So teachers and writers of world history have to decide what to include. Several possible standards can be used in decision making. Durability, right, which would make the Paleolithic section enormous because it lasted so long. Change, population. Well, then the focus would be Eurasia because of the 80% of the population. That would get more space. Influence, the impact of Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam on other parts of the world. Or the historian's location and audience. Is that a deciding factor? And historians do not agree on the proper balance when teaching world civilizations. So when teaching or writing, something has to get cut. And the reflection comes in, how do historians decide? Right? The length, the size, the impact of a culture are all arguments for including or excluding a historical case. And we must also recognize that where the historian and the audience are located matters. Ethiopian high school students would naturally have a curriculum that puts Ethiopia and then Africa at the center and then goes to the outside world, reversing the Eurocentric model that many Europeans and those in North America or parts of North America might use. And historians have yet to end these debates or accept one set of clear and firm answers to these questions. So no consensus on a proper balance, which is very interesting for this chapter because so much of our focus for a very long time is Asia and then Europe. So why does the Americas and Africa, or why do the Americas and Africa not get as much, not as much focus? Interesting questions to think about. Okay. This is our first visual source for chapter 6. This is the Shield Jaguar and the Lady Zoc. It shows a royal couple from a Maya city about 724 CE with the king Shield Jaguar on the left and his primary wife, Lady Zoc, on the right. Looks like she's helping him dress for a war-related ceremony or sacrifice even, as she's offering him his helmet. The head of a jaguar, an animal that is widely associated with strength and bravery, aggression, warfare, and definitely high social status. And the T-shaped frame at the center contains a number of Maya glyphs or written symbols indicating a doorway, and thus sets the action in an interior space, maybe. And he's wearing some body armor and looks like he's carrying a knife, which, like I said, suggests the warfare or the sacrifice. And his wife is clad in a blouse that's similar to those worn by Maya women in southern Mexico today. Okay, in presentation, or not presentation, this is the presentation of captives. This is visual source 6.2. So warfare was frequent amongst the Maya cities, and so a common theme in court art were the captives from warfare. And they used spear throwers, lances, clubs, swords, shields, axes. Maya wars were chaotic affairs aimed at the capture of individual prisoners for sacrifice, or sometimes slavery. And those prisoners were named in the glyphs that accompanied the portrayal of battles, along with the inscriptions, he has been captured or seized. And this is actually a reconstructed image from a Maya archaeological site in southern Mexico called Bonampak, well known for its vivid murals. And here we see the events that took place in the late 790s CE. And it shows the king there holding the staff, kind of right there in the middle. Receiving prisoners of war from his victorious noble warriors. And to the right of the king in this painting are maybe allies. They seem to be dressed differently. We also see maybe some female companions, wife, mother, and it looks like some servants. And to the king's left are 6 more warriors, high-ranking warriors probably, while the low-level warriors guard each side of the door on the bottom. So these warriors were a much higher status than those down here that are guarding the door. Now the prisoners are center stage in the mural, right? There's a dead captive sprawling below the king's staff. I'm not sure if you can see it. As the severed head lies on a bed of leaves below him. There's the head right there. And the 4 small images at the top indicate constellations, showing favorable configuration for the sky. And remember, we've talked about Maya astronomy. And there are 3 stars on its back, which represent what we know as Orion's belt. Pretty interesting. Okay, this one is Visual Source 6.3. It's actually a bloodletting ritual. The bleeding and ultimately the sacrifice of captives, like for example in Visual Source 6.2, as a part of a more pervasive practice of bloodletting that was rampant throughout Maya religious and court life. Significant occasions like birth, marriage, death, even as simple as planting crops and dedicating buildings, were sanctified with human blood, the most valued and holy substance in the Maya world. And beyond this practice lay the Maya belief in the mutual relationship of humans and their gods. And that relationship is done through the means of bleeding. The massive loss of blood often triggered a trance-like state where those individuals would lose consciousness that the Maya experienced as a mystical union with their gods or ancestors. And the lancets used to draw the blood, usually from the tongue in women and the genitals from men, were invested with sacred power. Now the kings and their wives were central to these bloodletting rituals. This again here is King Shil Jaguar and Lady Zoc, which were also in Visual Source 6.1. The date, like I said, is the early 700s. For this particular carving, the king is holding a torch, suggesting that the ritual occurs maybe at night, while his kneeling wife draws a thorn-studded rope through her perforated tongue, and the rope falls into a basket thereof with bloody paper, which is burned with the result of a smoke nourishing the gods. And that's the major part of the ritual. And soon, after, she goes first, and then eventually he lets his own blood flow. For the glyphs accompanying this carving declare that he is letting blood and she is letting blood. See the glyphs right there and right there. Okay, in Visual Source 6.4, it's the ball game. So, almost the most well-known and intriguing feature of Maya life was a ball game in which teams of different players, often 2 on a side, sought to control a rubber ball using their thighs, torsos, and upper arms to make it hit a marker or a ring that had been built into the walls. And deeply rooted in Maya mythology, the game had long been popular throughout Maya territory and elsewhere in Mesoamerica. On one level, it was a sport, often played for entertainment and recreation, but the game also reflected and symbolized the prevalence of warfare amongst Mayan cities. So the ball game was yet another occasion for the shedding of blood, as losing players, which were usually war captives, were killed, sometimes bound in ball-like fashion, and rolled down the steps of the court to their death. And the larger mythic context of the ball game was the eternal struggle of life and death, which was so central to Maya religious thinking. And in this visual source, a rollout of a vase dating from maybe 7th or 8th century depicts this ball game in action. So this was on a vase, rolled out. Okay, make sure that makes sense to you guys. We have 2 players on each side. All right, 2 players here and 2 players here. The 2 players on each side echo the hero twins of Mayan mythology. Famous ball players who triumphed over the lords of the underworld in the extended game and were later transformed triumphantly into the sun and the moon. So the glyphs accompanying this image, named 2 kings of adjacent cities, suggested the game may have been played on occasion as a substitute for warfare between rival cities. That's an interesting thought. Okay, and that concludes our reflections and visual sources from Chapter 6. I hope you enjoyed.